Hello and welcome to Iain Dale All Talk. This is the podcast and video now, where we like to talk to people in the world of politics and media and find out a little bit about more about what makes them tick. Well, today we're going to talk to my own MP, believe it or not, Greg Clark. He's been an MP since 2005, I think.
Indeed,
I'm
yes,
right
that's
in
right.
saying.
Yep.
Recently Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. I think I got that right.
You did get it
well.
right, which is more than I did when I was first appointed.
A ridiculous title. Why don't they just go back to the Department of Trade and Industry? It'd be so much simpler, wouldn't it?
But when I was appointed, it was so convoluted and new that when I came out, having come out of the cabinet room, came out of the door of number 10, and Laura Koonsberg, I think it was, shouted, "What post have you got, Mr. Clark?" And I was about to say, and then I was suddenly kind of seized with concern that I would get the words in the wrong order. So I'm afraid I copped out and said, it'll be announced on the website. So I understand your problem.
Well, actually, let's start with that. Tell us about that day, because, being appointed to the Cabinet for the first time, that is a memorable moment in anyone's life. Take us through that day.
Well, it really was. But that wasn't when I was appointed to the Cabinet for the first time. Of course, my first appointment to the Cabinet was under David Cameron as the Communities Secretary. And actually, before that, I was appointed Universities and Science Minister, attending the Cabinet. So I had a few goes at it, but I have to say that each time, it is a kind of huge thrill to be. If you're walking up Downing Street, then you sort of know that it's good news. They're not so cruel that they make people walk up to be fired.
Because they used to do that, didn't they?
They did used to do it, yeah, and that's pretty mean. But it's walking up, you're still very nervous as to what's going to happen.
And you haven't got a clue at that point what job you're going to be offered.
No, none whatever. And sometimes that can throw you a bit. So when Theresa appointed me to the post of Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, I'd been in the Cabinet as Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, and I thought, since I'm there, I'm going to be appointed to the Cabinet. So I assumed it would be that. I'd only done it for a year. And when she started the conversation by saying, well, Craig, you've done a great job, but I'd like you to do something different. And your sort of heart sinks a bit and you think, what's coming?
DWP, oh my God.
You said it. And I was enjoying that role. I'd been a councillor in my time and I got to know the councillors pretty well. And then she said, I'd like you to do this new role, bringing together the Energy Department, Energy and Climate Change Department, with the Business Department, and to develop an industrial strategy. And I was so kind of surprised and discombobulated by the whole thing that I sort of just kind of nodded, said, thank you. And then I just realised on the way out that actually this was a big thing, to create a new department, which was obviously going to be quite important to the way that she saw her government, and to entrust me with it. And I didn't particularly know Theresa very well before. I had no idea what she thought of me. Well, she is quite a reserved person, and I wouldn't, if she hadn't have offered me a job, I wouldn't have been surprised in the sense that, she didn't owe me anything, and I genuinely didn't know what she thought of me. So the fact that it was revealed that actually, she thought enough of me to entrust me with this and to create this new department, I was suddenly on my way out thinking, my goodness, she must think that I'm terribly, ungrateful and blasé about this thing. So I text her later to say, don't think that I was caught by surprise, but I'm absolutely thrilled to have this role.
I can't really compare this experience to that, but when I was first offered a weekday programme on LBC, it's exactly the same. I was so shocked because I assumed they'd offer me something at the weekend. And they said, no, we want you to do the evening show. And I actually got a text from Jonathan Richards, who was managing editor at the time, later that evening saying, "You didn't seem particularly excited." I said, no, I am very excited. But I was thinking, I've already got a full-time job. How can I do both? So it is weird how you react to these things. And then you go to the other extreme of when Margaret Beckett was offered Foreign Secretary. And I think she literally said, "Fuck me."
Well, thankfully I didn't say that. I don't know what Theresa might have thought of that. She might have rescinded the offer on the spot.
But it was a big job.
Yeah.
And if we think back, I think in the 80s and 90s, DTI, as it was then, Department of Trade and Industry, that was considered to be one of the top jobs outside the top three.
Yeah.
And I think over the last 20 years, it's sort of slightly dropped down the pecking order. But now, I think it's coming back again, isn't it? Or sort of over the last 5 or 6 years it has.
Well, this was Theresa's intention, in a way. I mean, first of all, bear in mind the context. This was 2016, just after the Brexit referendum. And, quite a lot of business, I won't say all of business, but quite a lot of business was quite shocked by the result, weren't expecting this. And in the weeks afterwards, there was quite a lot of nervousness about what this meant for the economy, not least after the whole Project Fear things. And so it was quite a big job in being the person responsible for relations with business and keeping business going and confident and investing, given this big surprise that had happened. So that's the first thing. The second thing was bringing together the Energy and Climate Change Department into the Business Department. Some people thought, was this a downgrading of the climate change agenda? Actually, it wasn't. We might come to talk about that. Theresa had the view that having set our ambitions, now was the time to link it to the real economy, as it were, and
which kind of makes sense. Doesn't it?
I think it does. I don't think there's much thought that I see to decouple it from business. So you had joining together two departments, and then this commission to develop an industrial strategy. That was quite a bold and initially quite controversial.
Well, it was seen as sort of sub-Miliband-esque, wasn't it, in a way?
Well, I'm not sure it was sub-Miliband-esque. He hadn't really talked about that, but it was. I mean, the association of industrial strategy, especially for Conservative administrations, was pretty much with the 1970s, when it was about kind of picking winners or trying to. Yeah. The winners usually turned out to be losers, and they were normally picked to be given shed loads of subsidy that didn't make much difference. So it had bad associations, but that wasn't what I wanted. And actually, talking to Theresa, it wasn't what she wanted. It was, I think, but I would say this, I think quite a conservative view that if you have opportunities ahead of you in a world that is changing very rapidly, actually to kind of think about the future and to prepare yourself for it, not at all by choosing companies to subsidise, but by thinking, which areas should you be improving your performance in. One of them was science and innovation, to make sure that we were continuing and building on our strengths there, addressing things like the technical skills that were even in the best of times, there were lots of employers saying that they couldn't meet their order books because they couldn't count on the technical skills. So things like that, to address some of the foundations of the economy, I do think was the right thing. But initially, it was thought to be quite controversial until people, I think, got to see that actually it wasn't at all the 1970s. It was a very conservative thing of being good stewards of the economy and the country, and and preparing to do even better in the future.
Do you think one of the reasons that she appointed you to that particular role was because, obviously, and you hinted at it earlier, I mean, business was generally, or big business was certainly in favour of Remain, and were quite aghast at the result. Now, you had been a Remainer. I suspect, I mean, if I was her, I'd be thinking, well, I want someone to sort of calm the waters here. I don't want a sort of, I don't know, a more aggressive kind of politician. But you're quite a good diplomat, a conciliator, I think.
Well, certainly I think that, you know, a lot of what I've done is to kind of get people on board and on side with projects that we've been doing. And I suppose I try to be pretty diplomatic in my approach.
Well, you're a conciliator, aren't you? You're not somebody who deliberately causes division.
No, I mean, my approach to politics is, and it's the only way I can do it, and I don't necessarily big myself up about it, it's to try to find ways to kind of bring people together, rather than, I'm not a big debater in the sense of, you know, kind of finding ways to really kind of slam down the opposition. That's quite an important skill, but it's not really me. So that might have been in her mind. I don't think it was particularly about Europe, though. Certainly that never was mentioned in either the conversation in appointing me or really kind of subsequently, that I had a particular job to do to kind of deal with the questions in people's minds on Europe. But perhaps that's the approach that she wanted. Well,
we'll come on to that a bit later, because that nearly finished your political career, didn't it? But you're still here.
I'm still here. I'm still standing.
Let's talk a bit about your background, because you have a very untypical background in many ways for a Conservative. Born in Middlesbrough, brought
Less
up
so
in
these
Middlesbrough.
days, of course.
Well, you are right. Maybe you were the forerunner of the new sort of band of Red Wall MPs. So tell us a little bit about your childhood, your background, your education.
So I was born and bred in Middlesbrough, the northeast. Went to the local comp and then sixth form college, and
we shared the same economics teacher.
We shared the same economics teacher, Steve Earnshaw, who I think taught you in Essex.
He did.
Then
straight out of university.
He came
to my school, and then after he'd finished with me, he then moved back up to the northeast.
You kind of drove him north. He went about as far as you could go in the country. So he taught at the South Park Sixth Form College on Teesside, and was my economics teacher, and actually a great inspiration to me. He was very engaging and engaged, very much kind of connected with the political and policy debates. And I don't know what his politics are, but he was very encouraging in the development. As you know, if you're in the sixth form and you're studying economics, then you know you're getting into areas of political debate. And
well, that's why I decided I wanted to do economics at A-level, because I thought they didn't do politics A-level at my school, so I thought, well, it's the next best thing, little knowing that there was a lot of maths involved in it as well. And I mean, I credit Steve with the fact that I scraped a grade E at A-level, because I really struggled with that subject, still do, obviously. And I bet you got an A.
I did get it.
Yeah, I knew you would.
That was down to Steve, I'm sure.
But we were going to get him and his wife to come down to watch
BMQ's. Then lockdown happened.
Well, so let's do that.
We'll do it, absolutely, as soon as we can.
Okay, so...
But you know, that's where I was. In fact, one of the reasons I studied economics and then did it at university was it was the sort of the nearest equivalent, I guess, to a kind of vocational course. I think it was... no one had been to university from my background, and it wasn't that in any sense, you know, my parents said, you know, you mustn't study history or, you know, French or something like that. But I had a sense that studying economics was a bit like training, which is not actually the right way to approach it. But actually I enjoyed it and went on to study it and then did a PhD in it.
What did your parents want for you? Because most of the people that I talk to in this podcast, their parents had a particular idea of what they wanted to do. My parents were from generations of farmers, so I was set to be a farmer. That's what anybody in my family always did. But I knew from a very young age that was not for me. Well,
I had a similar thing in the sense that my dad was a milkman, and so I did... have to go out on the milk round at 6 o'clock in the morning.
And that put you off.
And certainly put me off. And I think it was obvious to my dad that that was not the life for me. Actually, I also used to collect the milk money door to door on a Thursday and Friday night. And actually, I did quite enjoy that because, and although I didn't know it at the time, it's not very different from canvassing as a politician. You basically kind of go door to door, and you can't just say, £2.50, please. You have to have a little chat with them, how are you doing this week, and all the rest of things. And by the way, it'll be £2.50. And you've got your kind of regular customers. You go week after week. And I used to quite enjoy that. But I was never going to be running around at 6 o'clock in the morning delivering pints of milk. I was too clumsy, not a morning person. I don't know what happened to the genes, but my dad and my granddad were milkmen. It was John Clark and Son, which was the family business. But I must have had my mother's genes because the milkman's genes didn't survive. So I don't think they were expecting that. But they'd had no experience of university, and it wasn't just in the family. I mean, not many people in the kind of type of schools that I went to at the time, certainly my comprehensive school, it was a small minority went to university. They'd had no experience of it, so they were always supportive, but it wasn't a world that they knew. So it had to be, it was my choice, and it was me that kind of researched it.
And did the teachers point you in that direction?
Well, so the sixth form college that I went to, being a sixth form college, so everyone there was 16 to 18, and so it was a bit more mixed than a smaller comprehensive school, and so yes, they encouraged it, but I remember being self-driven. I mean, one of the slightly embarrassing but probably revealing things was that when I was the age of 16, we were told to kind of look at what universities you might want to apply to. And I'd sort of been reading various articles. And I do remember saying to the university admissions tutor that this place called Oxbridge seems to be very well regarded. I'm not sure where it is. And I was.
I've seen somewhere called Uxbridge.
And so I had a bit of an education in.
You went to Magdalen College, obviously famous in the last couple of weeks for.
No, Magdalen Oxford has been famous, not Magdalen Cambridge.
You're absolutely right on that. I won't malign Magdalen Cambridge. But did you feel comfortable there? Because, I wasn't clever enough to go to Oxbridge, but I live near Cambridge, and a lot of my schools said, well, you should apply to Cambridge. And I said, no, I don't think I'd fit in there. Did you feel that you did?
Well, yes and no. I was very motivated to go, and keen to get in, but I'm sure I looked like a different breed when I turned up. So at the time, Magdalen Cambridge was a very kind of public school college, kind of cords and tweeds and all the rest of it. And I turned up in my standard Middlesbrough comprehensive school outfit of kind of white socks and trousers from Top Man.
That was my outfit because I come from Essex.
Well, it's probably not so different actually. Kind of Friday nights in non-Teesside and Friday nights in Essex, and I did sort of find myself looking around and seeing the cords and the tweed and seeing my kind of Friday night Middlesbrough outfits and thinking that we did look a bit different, and the other thing, it's I would think quite a lot of people, perhaps most people, would experience this. You do think, my goodness, all these people are going to be absolutely brilliant and phenomenally academically accomplished, and and I'm going to be rumbled that I've kind of managed somehow by fluke to get in. And then, kind of over time, but gradually, you think, well, actually, then I'm not being left behind by these people, and you gradually build a bit of confidence about it. But it was a magical place. I mean, to go to a place, a place like Cambridge, not just the beautiful medieval and buildings of all ages, but the beauty of the backs and the environment and the weeping willows by the Cam. It did feel magical. It's not that I lived in a place that I never saw a blade of grass. I mean, Middlesbrough's on the edge of the North York Moors, and there's a lot of beauty there. Yeah. But it was not. Lots of people that had been to public schools and things had spent quite a lot of time in places that were quite similar. I hadn't, and I was. I loved it.
That slight feeling of imposter syndrome that you kind of allude to, has that followed you through your life? Because I think there are a lot of people in politics who seem supremely confident, particularly I think people who've been to public school and then Oxbridge. It sort of injects them with a sense of confidence in a way that I've never felt. Whatever job I've been in, I've always felt I've had to prove myself to myself rather than just anybody else. But all the different jobs you've had through, I mean, you were Director of Policy of the Conservative Party before you became an MP, then obviously various ministerial posts. I mean, were there times when you were sitting around the cabinet table just thinking, what is a boy from Middlesbrough doing in a place like this?
Yeah, it's extraordinary. I mean, but more than that, it was terrifying at first. Each of these positions, I spent the first few weeks thinking, they're going to find out that they've appointed this guy and made a big mistake here, and that he's not going to be up to it. But I guess my response to that was always I've always been quite determined that actually I'm not going to be bested by anyone, and I'm if others can do it, I can do it, and to apply myself and to really work intensively at it to kind of show that I can do it. I mean, I don't think I would ever allow myself to think that having been appointed, then I'm going to show them. I'm going to make a success of it. I'm not going to slink away and allow anyone to say, well, actually, he wasn't.
What have you failed at in your life?
Well, going right back, I failed to get into Cambridge first time round. They rejected me, and one of the teachers, it wasn't Steve Earnshaw, as it happens, and I don't know whether he did this deliberately, but I can't remember what my second choice university was, and the offer for it was BBC. I distinctly remember. I don't think you get those offers now.
No, I used to keep getting 2 E's as an offer. And I was a bit before you.
And the teacher said to me, he said, "Oh well, you go to the second choice. What you're going to get your C in." And I was so stung by that, and I just in a flash said to him, "I'm not going to get a C in anything. I'm going to get 3 A's. I'm going to go to Cambridge." and so I actually got 2 A's and a B, but I applied again and they took me.
What was the B in?
The B was in French, as it happens. And I was still annoyed about that because
when did the political bug bite? At Cambridge or before?
Before. And partly through studying economics at A-level, but around that time I became quite interested in public policy and stuff. I mean, I was pretty much a kind of, it was kind of nerd central in terms of the things that I was interested in. I used to go, for example, every Saturday from quite an early age, even before sixth form, to the Middlesbrough Central Library, and they would give me the previous week's copies of the Financial Times. And I would take them home on the bus and read them during the subsequent
Your
week.
equivalent of a porno mag.
Exactly. And that's, and I think, considering I was a teenager, I think that was probably the kids with porno.
That's almost outclassing William Hague, isn't it?
It is.
For nerdism.
I think it is, I'm afraid so. And can you imagine travelling on the bus with a kind of huge button? In fact, sometimes it was every kind of fortnight or something like Mr. Week, and going on the 263 bus from Middlesbrough to where I lived in Nordby with this big bundle of
I can remember, though,
newspapers.
at the beginning of the sixth form, Steve Earnshaw and Bob Crossan, the other economics teacher that we had, they said you must buy the Sunday Times every day and read the business section.
Right, yeah.
And that was kind of my introduction to all this world, really.
No, well, it was...
and I remember the smell of the Sunday Times magazine. It was, I don't know what kind of paper they used to make it of, but it had this remarkable smell to it.
Yes. No, absolutely. So I was quite into that. But I got into politics as well. And actually, it was partly a Teesside thing, in that then it was a combination. It was completely Labour dominated at the time. I mean, to the point, the idea that there would be a Conservative MP for South Bank, which was the part of Middlesbrough I went to school in, as there is now, Jacob Young, was completely unthinkable. Every post was occupied by a Labour politician. And I remember...
There was one Tory MP, Tim Devlin.
Tim Devlin was Stockton South, yes.
I don't know the North East very well, but that can't be that far away.
That's quite true. He had a marginal seat there and won it. It's we were on the south bank of the Tees, and actually that was considered to be a bit distant from us. But you're right, and actually there was a seat called Langbar, which Michael Bates represented, and Richard Holt before
That's
him.
The one.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So these were people that were there. So it wasn't at all devoid of Conservative representation in the region. But I do remember when I was at school being very struck at how few people in my year at school were going on to further study from the age of 16. And bear in mind, I was 16 in 1983, which was, during the recession on Teesside, very high level of unemployment. It wasn't that people were going, leaving education to go into great jobs. A lot of, most people, the vast majority of people, were leaving school at 16, often to go on to, kind of YTS positions that mostly didn't lead to anything. And it was so normal that I remember thinking, this is really complacent, that there are people, I was determined to go into the sixth form, but there were lots of other people for whom the kind of expectations weren't that they would be educated beyond that age. And I didn't go to, at all a terrible school or anything. It was a normal school, but that was the ethos. And I do remember that was probably one of my kind of first political thoughts, that, this is not acceptable, that there are people who have greater potential that should be encouraged. And I thought there was a kind of sense of complacency around it. But what, just at that time, so I think it was sort of 82, 83, the SDP was being formed. And that seemed to be quite a challenge to the Labour Party. And probably my first political definition was sort of anti-Labour, anti-socialism. And so I joined the SDP and delivered leaflets for this sort of embryonic party on Teesside in 83 and 84 and 85. And when I went to university, I was president of the university SDP society, but I also joined the Conservative Party at university. It was probably against the rules.
But that's what that happened a lot, particularly at Oxford and Cambridge. I don't think it did necessarily at other universities, but a lot of people. I think Nick Clegg was a member of all three when he was there.
And actually, I think it was fine. I think it was a good thing, because it meant that you got to go to speaker meetings with kind of visiting speakers from each. And by the end of that, I was pretty clear that actually, well, it was when the SDP merged with the Liberals, I was very clear I didn't want to go in that direction, that actually my political, kind of values, where I felt at home was on the Conservative side.
And there was quite a group of you that had been in the SDP that went to the Conservatives: Danny Finkelstein, Andrew Cooper, Rick Nye.
Yep.
Trying to think, there was some others too. Did you all kind of know each other?
We did, because we'd been active. There weren't that many people in the kind of young SDP and SDP students, so we did know each other. Through that, I didn't know people outside that, and I guess we were thinking in the same way.
Who was the first politician you ever met?
The first politician I'd ever met would have been a man called Jim Tin, who was the Labour MP for the Redcar constituency. And when I was about 15 or 16, I pestered my grandmother to take me on a day trip to London to go into the House of Commons, and I wrote to him to ask whether we could, have a ticket to come into the public gallery. And I remember that I don't think he couldn't get me a ticket in the public gallery.
Oh, he could have done if he wanted to.
But he did say he was going to be in committee that day, and you could sit in the public gallery of the committee. So my first experience was sitting with my bemused grandmother in the public gallery, watching probably very dry, I can't remember what the subject was, committee debate taking place. So I think that's...
But it didn't put you off. When did you first decide, I want to be an MP? Don't tell me 14.
No, quite the opposite. It never occurred to me. It was a kind of... I was interested in public policy, and I was interested, motivated by the things that I said about people not having the opportunities that I thought they had. But it never occurred to me that it would be possible. I mean, even frankly, having gone to a good university, even then, I didn't really think that, perhaps it was ridiculous not to, that was something that I could do. I mean, when people talk about, well, I decided I want to be an MP, I'm always, kind of amazed at, again, perhaps either the clarity of intention or the self-confidence that would lead people to do that. I mean, it seemed to be a very lofty, impossible aspiration. So it was only kind of gradually that when I got older and started doing jobs and started writing some papers for think tanks, that quite late on did it ever occur to me that it might be possible to be an MP.
What did you do when you left university? Because I know that you were a special advisor to Ian Lang for a couple of years, and then you worked as sort of controller of finances for the BBC.
Commercial policy.
So
straight after, I went to, having graduated in economics, I'd done a dissertation that was supervised by someone at the LSE. It was considered at the time to be a bit too applied. It was inspired by Nigel Lawson, actually. In fact, he refers to a paper that I wrote in his The View from Number 11, I think it's called, in his autobiography.
Yeah, that was a brilliant book, half of which was unintelligible to me.
Probably to me as well. But he brought in tax relief for employee share ownership and incentive pay.
I remember.
And I was quite interested in that. And I think actually Steve Earnshaw probably caused me to be interested because it was the sort of A-level topic that you did. And I ended up writing a dissertation for an undergraduate degree that was supervised by someone at the LSE. That the LSE then said to me, well, why don't you turn it into a PhD? I'd had a job lined up through the milk round with a company called the Boston Consulting Group. They were good enough to defer it for a couple of years. So I did the PhD. Then I went to BCG. and then shortly after that, it was about 96, Ian Lang, who was then I was going to say the business secretary, but in fact he was president of the Board of Trade.
He was.
Which was a post that Michael Heseltine revived. And Ian kept the title because he was not at all a grand figure, but he thought it would be a bit insulting to Michael to revert to the previous title. So I went to work for the President of the Board of Trade as his special advisor for the last 18 months or so of that period of Conservative government. And I mean, Ian was a kind of great mentor to me, encouraged me, and I got to see that actually, in the words of the kind of Hamilton song, to be in the room where it happens, to kind of get yourself there so you can make arguments, you can be round the table where decisions are made. If you do have an aspiration to kind of put your oar in and try to influence things for the better, then actually trying to get yourself round the table is worthwhile.
How important was that experience when you later became a minister? Because, I mean, you weren't as bad for that long, but you clearly learned an awful lot from it about how the system operated, how you could get round the system maybe, because sometimes the machinery of government can be a bit like an oil tanker.
Yeah, it was a fantastic education. I was the only SPAD. There were fewer of them then, and there was one in the Department of Trade and Industry, and it was me. And so you did see everything, all of the papers that the Secretary of State saw in meetings with him, in meetings with officials. I worked quite closely and I think well with the officials, and yeah, it was a good crash course, subject to the same kind of imposter syndrome that, my goodness, how can I possibly get my head around the, 300 different things that the department and the Secretary of State was doing. But that was a very good experience.
And then 2001, you became Director of Policy for the Conservative Party.
Yep.
A difficult time, I would say, for the party. And Duncan Smith had just become leader. Somebody who I wouldn't have thought you were naturally in tune with. You were sort of, I would say, almost a Cameroon before Cameron was invented.
I didn't vote for David Cameron, actually, in the leadership election. But in fact, I was appointed by William Hague.
Oh, wait. Right.
So I was at the BBC at the time, and William asked me to come and see him and asked me to be Director Designate of Policy, because Danny Finkelstein was the Director of Policy, and he was about to go off to fight, I think it was Harrow West. And it's a kind of, it reveals the kind of thinking at the time. This was, we'd lost it in 97. This was in the run-up to the 2001 election. It was assumed that we would win it back, and therefore they'd need to have a replacement for the next Parliament. And talking about meeting politicians for the first time, I remember going to William's office, which was high up a staircase in the main Palace of Westminster, met by Sebastian Coe, who was then his chief of staff, who, needless to say, bounded up the stairs, and I was sort of completely out of breath by the time I got to this eyrie, and kind of ushered into the presence of William Hague, who I'd only ever seen on the TV before. And it does feel, even though he's obviously a very familiar face and figure now, just as if you're kind of been ushered into a movie set, and this person that you kind of see on the TV, you're sitting down having a chat with. But he said, would I come and join him? I had conceived the plan to put myself forward to fight Hartlepool at the 2001 election, being a kind of, hometown near sort of seat, and thought with Peter Mandelson as the MP it would be quite stimulating. And he said, and I thought, if I wanted to be an MP, which by then I did, you need to have some experience. He said, trust me, I think you'll learn a lot by doing this. come and do it. And I remember him sort of lowering his voice and saying, I can't say this to anyone else, but I don't think we're going to win this election in 2001. But I think we'll make a lot of progress back. So the job of being Director of Policy for the party in the next Parliament will be very satisfying, very stimulating, because we'll be putting together a programme that has the chance of being enacted in government. Now, did he know?
And we all know what happened then.
A few months later, we got, I think, one extra seat net. He resigned very honourably shortly after the election, and Iain Duncan-Smith won the contest to succeed him. And Iain very kindly and generously took me on. We had conversations during the leadership campaign, and actually Iain had a big reform agenda. I mean, Iain did reflect quite deeply. You might remember that he had spent a lot of time thinking about Easterhouse in Glasgow, the kind of deprivation there, had a very strong view that kind of the Conservative Party needed to be on the side of what were then called the vulnerable, and needed to have a view and a connection with inner cities, needed to be genuinely interested in the public services. So actually a lot of what Iain inaugurated then, I think, was very important for the party, and as you know, through the Centre for Social Justice, and to this day, he's maintained that, and that was a big part of the kind of revival, it seems to me, of the electability of the Conservative Party.
But it's interesting that you made that transition, because there weren't many people that did. I mean, most people who had been in the previous regime, I think the people around Iain Duncan-Smith made it their business to get rid of, and yet you survived that transition, which, I mean, in a way, that goes through your career. You've adapted to whoever the new person is. I won't say quite to the extent that Gavin Williamson manages to, but that kind of all came to a bit of a halt with Boris Johnson, didn't it?
Well, so I worked after Iain for Michael Howard as well. I've never been a very factional person, in truth. Partly, and often I don't perceive some of the kind of manoeuvrings and things that are going on. I'm not very good at that sort of thing. I'm more kind of focused on the kind of policy stuff, and so I've never been part of, as it were, the kind of the opposite faction to Iain or Michael or Teresa or whatever. And I think they've kind of known that I could do the job for them, and haven't been and wouldn't get embroiled in that. But you're right, obviously, that when Boris came in, but listen, we had a very clear disagreement on Brexit. That I thought we should have a softer kind of Brexit than he did, but it was perfectly amicable. We never had a crossword about it, and when he came in, I knew perfectly well. I'd had conversations with him before. I never expected to be appointed to his team, because perfectly reasonably he'd been elected on a very different approach, wanted to have a team that was genuinely, totally committed to it, and it was evident from my views were pretty known that I wasn't that. But I didn't resent it at all. In fact, I didn't. Some of my colleagues resigned their office to Theresa May on her last day, so that they.
Alan Duncan did that, I seem to remember.
Did he? There were a few, and I didn't, because I thought. I mean, people make their own decisions, but I thought that would be disrespectful to Boris. I didn't regard myself as having been sacked from the cabinet, as it were, because he was forming a new team, and he was perfectly entitled to do so. But I thought to resign to Theresa would be to say, well, I felt it would be to say, I couldn't work for this man, and he doesn't have, or perhaps there might be a sense that he didn't have the legitimacy, which I didn't feel. I thought he was absolutely legitimately the leader and absolutely legitimately should appoint a team of the people who wanted to run the country in the way that he did.
Who did you support initially in that contest?
In that contest, Jeremy Hunt. Jeremy and I have done a lot together. We came in together. We're good friends, and I thought he would do a good job, and I backed him from the
Well,
outset.
talking of Jeremy Hunt, let's talk about your current role as head of the Select Committee. What's this official title? The Select Committee on Science...
Science and Technology. It's less of a mouthful than Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. It's the Science and Technology Committee.
That committee, I think, used to be considered a bit of a backwater, but then Norman Lamb, I think, did a tremendous job in giving it some profile. And boy, have you given it some profile.
Well, I think COVID might have given it some profile, to be fair.
Maybe. But I'm not sure that... people would automatically have thought, well, Health Select Committee, yeah, we can see that's going to take the lead on this. But you have very successfully, I think, made your committee at the centre of this in a way that others maybe haven't. And I get the feeling that you possibly enjoy your role as chairman of the committee, possibly more than you did as a cabinet minister.
So I do enjoy it, and it's a privilege to do it, especially at a time like this. It's not the same as being a cabinet minister. You can ask questions and you can make reports, but actually to be taking decisions and putting them into effect, that is a particular privilege. Scrutiny is important, but it's been absolutely fascinating to have the opportunity on COVID, for example, right from the outset, to hear from the scientists in this country, Patrick Vallance, Chris Whitty, particular specialists, scientists from around the world, obviously ministers and former advisors to prime ministers.
Come on to that in a second.
And actually, one of the privileges is that, as a committee, we decided from the outset that actually this was for science, and with a committee that covers the whole of government. We're not tied to a particular department. This was clearly a big scientific event, if you like. And especially when Parliament, in those early phases, did go into a kind of lockdown, and it took, it responded very quickly, and compared to the time that the previous arrangements had been in place. But I did feel that there was a responsibility to ask questions that might be on the minds of other members of Parliament, given that we had the ability to do it. And even though we had the press conferences throughout this, and we did have questions, Matt Hancock basically did weekly questions, the big difference is you can only ask one question at the press conference, or at the dispatch box, so people sometimes squeeze in a couple if they're not muted in time. Whereas with the Select Committee, you can really go into it and pursue a line of inquiry and actually help expose some of the thinking behind the decisions that, first of all, do help you learn lessons, but also for something as important as this, give not just members of Parliament, but the watching public a more in-depth understanding of what's going on. And actually, you say the committee wasn't the most high-profile of select committees before. I don't think it got much in the way of viewers on the parliamentary channel, but actually lots of people tune in to even quite long sessions of the committee. And people write and say that they've found it illuminating.
How many members of the committee are actually scientists?
I'm not sure. Probably not a majority. Probably 4, something like that. I would say.
When I was watching, what was I watching the other day? I think when you had Matt Hancock in, and I was sitting there thinking, well, that's a damn fool question. And then I was thinking, not from you, from one or two, I won't name them, but from one or two of your colleagues. Does it, as chairman of a committee like that, sometimes are you sitting there thinking, oh, for goodness sake, couldn't you think of a better question than that?
Well, sometimes, but then sometimes what you think, I've had the experience of thinking, yeah, that's a silly question. And actually, the witness has said, actually, that is a very important question, and given something in response to it that was unexpected. You're not going to get every question right, and members of Parliament are not specialists in particular issues. And part of the role is to translate what is going on in terms of scientific advice into things that are intelligible to members of Parliament and therefore the public. And actually I think one of the problems that we can see is that there was quite a degree of groupthink in the early stages, that most of the scientists, excellent scientists, motivated by all the right reasons, adopted a strategy of trying to whether flatten the curve or call it herd immunity, whatever you like, and to gradually turn up the dial on social distancing measures, when actually we should have followed what other countries did, which was to go firmer, faster. And so not being literally 100% committee of scientists, but to regard your role as questioning scientists just as you'd question ministers, I think that's important.
I think one of the things that we've all learned from this is that science is actually just as much of an art as art is, because the scientists disagree on you've got exactly the same evidence, and yet you can have different scientists coming up with different conclusions. Absolutely. Whereas I must admit, I'd always thought, well, there has to be a correct answer to this. And we've learned that there isn't. You're
absolutely right. And I mean, scientists know this. I mean, it's scientists. So.
But it's a bit of a revelation to me.
Yeah, well, I think to a lot of people, not helpful when people talk about the science, because there rarely is. I mean, science, in fact, it is one of the most disputatious callings there is. I mean, you and I have been interested in politics for many years, and you expect that. But actually, the way science proceeds is people having a theory, normally untested when they first have it, then they test it against the evidence, but not just against the evidence, they publish it, and everyone piles in, tears it to pieces and says, actually, this is a kind of load of rubbish and all the rest of things. And it's pretty bruising. Your ego is pummeled pretty regularly if you're a scientist. And
who knew there were so many virologists or epidemiologists who were quite happy to come on television or radio and talk about it at length? I mean, that has been quite an interesting one. But one question I do want to put to you about the role of Parliament in the COVID crisis. Do you think that Parliament has got the balance right in terms of scrutinising the government? Because there are times when I see Matt Hancock in particular one day he'll be doing questions in the Commons, he might then make a statement, then he'll come and give evidence to your committee. And look, Nadeem Zahawi a bit the same. And you think, well, and Matt Hancock was in front of your committee for 4.5 hours the other day. And I did think to myself, is this really the right way of approaching this? Shouldn't these sessions be a bit more constrained? He has actually, after all, got a crisis to run, rather than constantly appear at the dispatch box or constantly in front of different select committees.
Well, I don't agree with that in the sense
I'm not saying
he
shouldn't appear. No. I'm just wondering whether the time that he's had to spend doing all of these parliamentary activities is maybe the best use of his time.
Well, I take the opposite view in a way, in that I think that one of the problems has been that it's all been a bit take or leave it on behalf of the government. The regulations come as a block, and you vote them down or you vote them up or down, and it's a kind of binary choice. Yeah. Whereas, as you know very well, most laws are subject to amendments, to debate, and you can improve them. You can change, if not the thrust of them, you can make important modifications. And there hasn't been the opportunity. Yeah, Matt Hancock can answer questions at the dispatch box, but the ability for Parliament to improve the regulations and the response, I think, has been insufficient. And I do think that, I mean, given all of the powers that have been taken, admittedly backed by Parliament, literally telling family members that they can't, it's a criminal offence for them to meet with each other, as it was for quite a long time. You absolutely have to answer questions, at the very least, of members of Parliament who are, I know myself, asking on the part of constituents. We all have post bags or email inboxes at the moment, and these are the questions on people's minds. So I don't think to insulate yourself from that and to, as it were, reserve more time to running the crisis, I don't think that's the right trade-off. And in fact, I think a bit more taking some of the advice of parliamentarians and actually the public through them would not be amiss.
Have you found, though, that when you had 7 hours with Dominic Cummings and then 4.5 hours with Matt Hancock, and I suspect that many people on the committee, after hearing Dominic Cummings, would have thought, well, I'm convinced by a lot of that. And then Matt Hancock comes along and says virtually the direct opposite of, well, quite a lot of what Dominic Cummings was saying. You think, yeah, I can see that. And then you have to, presumably, when you come to, the committee comes to write the report, you've somehow got to marry these totally conflicting bits of evidence.
Yeah. Exactly, and that's exactly what we're now doing with kind of wet towels around our head.
And how much of that do you and Jeremy Hunt do yourselves, and how much is it done by the sort of civil servants or the House of Commons staff that staff the committee?
So we've both committees have got an excellent team of clerks who've been absolutely magnificent through this. Meeting every week, helping invite the witnesses, providing kind of research briefings on background to inform questions. So we are well supported. But Jeremy and I, and actually members of our committee, we do, I think, take responsibility for this. It's the report will be the committee's report. It's not something that you're just going to put your name to.
And you've got to get all the committee to sign up to it, because it's not a good look if there are some members who say, "Oh, sorry, I can't sign up to that."
That's right. I think that's absolutely right. So Jeremy and I, in particular, are working quite hard on and looking at the evidence, as you say, looking for points of disagreement, but also points of common ground. For example, I put to Matt Hancock the other day something I think has very clearly emerged from our evidence sessions, which is virtually everyone now agrees that we made a big mistake in having a suppress the peak, herd immunity, call it what you will, strategy of not bringing in, of looking to eke out infections over a period of time rather than pressing the brake. And that was certainly not known at the time. The evidence that we had going back to March and even into April was that wouldn't have been the right approach. So things do emerge from this, and we'll try and establish that.
I'm just looking forward to the paragraph in the report that accuses the former Secretary of State for Health of not doing enough planning. That would be quite ironic, wouldn't it?
Well, actually, so there is going to be a section of the report on preparedness, and I chaired a meeting on that, and Jeremy didn't attend that meeting, so that he wouldn't be, as it were, kind of hovering over it and putting people off, and we will be clear-sighted and rigorous about that.
So Dominic Cummings.
Did you watch it, Iain?
I watched. It was one of those days where I'd completely misplanned my day because I'd got 3 or 4 things that I couldn't cancel. So I probably saw about 2 hours of it.
Right.
And it was gripping. And I'm not sure that you ever expected it to last that long. But I mean, what were you thinking doing it? Because it was the most. I mean, there have been lots of extraordinary Select Committee hearings in the past on all sorts of different things, but I can't think of one that was quite as extraordinary as this, and you were at the centre of it.
Well, actually, you probably find this in things that you've done in broadcasting. It felt actually quite an intimate conversation at the time. There was me and Jeremy, and then two other members of the committee at any one time, plus Dominic Cummings, and then a clerk and the broadcast people. So that's not many people, and we'd thought quite a bit about the questions that we wanted to ask and the areas that we wanted to get into. So we were quite focused on the conversation. So the kind of drama of it, actually, I found, I don't know what Jeremy found, I was a bit surprised when I came out.
So you weren't conscious of what was going on, and well, how could you be, I suppose? Yeah. But, I mean, it's a bit like, I suppose, if I do a big interview and at the end of it, I remember interviewing Theresa May once and saying to my producer afterwards, I got nothing out of that. And she said, what are you talking about? We've got 4 fantastic news stories. Did you feel a bit like that?
Just like that. So it was, I thought it was interesting, but I had no inkling that, a lot of people watching it thought that this was a kind of parliamentary drama that had happened. I thought it was an interesting set of answers.
And how do you disassociate any sort of personal feelings you might have on this? Because, I mean, he was the guy that basically tried to end your parliamentary career by, I mean, he would have, I mean, it wasn't him, but he would have no doubt advised the Prime Minister, well, withdrawing the whip from all of these Brexit rebels, that's the right thing to do. And that could have finished you. Was there any point there where you were thinking, I'm going to get you back here?
No, not at all. I've never borne any grudges against anyone that has crossed me in any way. Genuinely don't, and certainly not with Dominic Cummings. Actually, he was.
Because you worked with him in central office, didn't you, back in the day?
Yeah, he was director of strategy when I was director of policy. But I've got a regard for Dominic Cummings' strategic sense, and the strategy that he pursued at that time when I lost the whip. Clearly, I was on the wrong side of it, but it was highly effective in crystallising the argument that Boris wanted to put to the country, that he wanted to get Brexit done, and it was going to be very clear. It wasn't going to be a kind of a range of people with different views. They wanted to have a crystal clear message to the public, and also, more importantly, to get Brexit done. And the platform in which he came in was, after the troubles that Theresa May and we had in her government of not being able to get a majority, it was a clean break from that. So I can't, whilst it was, personally a very difficult period for me and some colleagues, I didn't take it personally. I don't think it was personal, or if it was, frankly, I'm not bothered about it.
But was there a point where you thought, well, this is the end? I'm going to have to go and do something else?
No, when I voted against the party whip at the time, it was made perfectly clear, and again, I've got no complaint whatsoever about the chief whip. He said that it would be regarded as a vote of confidence. And that's code, as you know, Ian, for that you lose the whip, and the right to put yourself forward to stand as a Conservative candidate in the general election.
And this was the thing that so many people seem to say, "Oh, it's terrible that they've done this." I'm thinking, no, they knew it was a confidence vote, so they knew exactly what would happen if they did it.
About that at all, it was very clear, and I'm sure, actually, there would be some people that probably would have voted in the same way as me if it wasn't a confidence vote, and it's perfectly reasonable for them to make a judgment. But I felt that I'd been so clear in office as business secretary that I thought a no-deal Brexit would be very damaging, and worked to try to get a deal to avoid that. That to turn around and say, well, actually, that was then, this is now, and it's fine, I felt would be the wrong thing to do. I felt that it would be incredible to do that, and so I voted the way that I did, but in full knowledge of the consequences, and my absolute expectation was that was going to be the end of my time in Parliament.
And what was the reaction of your local party to this? Because Tunbridge Wells was the only Remain supporting area in Kent, but local Conservative associations are not necessarily reflective of the local population. Did you have any problems there, or were they fully behind you?
Well, so I would probably say that the party in Tunbridge Wells probably had a majority of people who took a different view and thought that we should be prepared to leave without a deal. But I get on well with my local party. They're friends of mine, and I like them, and I think enough of them like me that actually, even though I think some of them, probably quite a lot of them, would rather that I had voted in a different way, they didn't. Not only did they not turn on me, they were very personally supportive. Even people who were strong Brexiteers, who'd campaigned strongly for Brexit in the referendum. So I never felt anything other than supported by my local party. But it wasn't a matter for the local party. If you don't have the whip, then whatever the local party thinks, you're not allowed to stand.
And I always thought that they would let you stand in the end. I remember I had several emails from people saying, I hope you've got your CV ready for Tunbridge Wells, Iain. But I hadn't, by the way, and I wouldn't have done it. But what did you have to promise, though, to get the whip back?
I didn't promise anything.
Well, why did they give it back to you and not people like Amber Rudd?
I don't know. I think, I don't know whether you've had Amber on.
I haven't, but
you should tell her.
I want to.
She'll be a good guest, and she can answer the question. I think of those of us that rebelled in that vote, I think we had different views of the party. Some of that group of 21, I think, thought the party had changed irrevocably in a way that it wasn't the party that they joined, that they therefore, it wasn't so much that they were leaving the party as the party had sort of left them and become something different, and were very critical of the party. That was not my view at all, quite the opposite. I never stopped feeling absolutely a Conservative. In fact, one of the most painful aspects of that period in which I didn't have the Conservative whip, I would appear on the TV and it would say Greg Clark brackets independent, and I was kind of shocked at that description. I counted myself as a Conservative. I was not someone that thought that Boris Johnson shouldn't be Prime Minister. I supported Jeremy Hunt, but I thought he won fairly and squarely, and actually, thinking back to his time as mayor, I thought he had the potential to be a good Prime Minister. And the fact that there was an agenda to reach out to, frankly, to go back to the beginning of our conversation, places like I grew up in, I thought was a good thing. So for me, it was about the particular issue: should we be prepared to leave the European Union without a deal? And that's all I ever voted against and criticised. But I think some others had sort of fallen out of love with the Conservative Party, or at least the direction that they felt it was taking.
You and I first met each other on the candidate circuit back in, I think it was 2003, 2004. I think we were both going for Beverley.
That's right, yes.
That didn't work out for either of us. And you ended up in Tunbridge Wells, which, I've lived there now for, 24 years. it's a strange area in some ways. I find. I suppose I would say that coming from Essex, but you clearly feel at home there.
I love it.
Your family lives there, and
it is a very particular place. H.G. Wells said of Tunbridge Wells, Tunbridge Wells is Tunbridge Wells, and there isn't a place on earth like it.
This is very true.
And it is true. I almost didn't apply to Tunbridge Wells because I thought it would be too posh and too grand. I thought that they'd want a kind of son of a duke or an earl to represent them, and this place that was, at least the town was Royal Tunbridge Wells, that a milkman's son from Middlesbrough was not really going to fit in there. But I discovered, and you will know this, it's not at all a grand town. There's no actually big aristocratic house in the constituency that the duke is the kingpin. Most of the residents are working people, different levels, but there's no. It's a prosperous town, but it's actually it's a town and it's a constituency because it has a lot of rural areas, very beautiful as well, which I think a lot of people don't necessarily think of Kent as being a particularly beautiful area. If you come to the Weald of Kent and the High Weald, it really is, and I love it, and I have from the moment that I went there.
Now, we've got to tell a story on this podcast, which I have told on the For the Many podcast before, about when you and I went to Crystal Palace Football Club together, because you're a Middlesbrough fan, but you wanted to get your young boy interested in football, or sort of just to get the atmosphere. And I know you came to the London Stadium a couple of times, but disgracefully you decided to get a season ticket at Crystal Palace, and you invited me to go and see Crystal Palace versus West Ham. Now, I've given my version of the story on the other podcast. You give your version now.
So I have heard your version, and it is pretty accurate. I think I was quite naive, but the background to this is growing up in Middlesbrough. Middlesbrough is the club that you can't fail to support, and it would be good to get them back in the Premiership. But being in Kent, it's quite a long way to go to the Riverside to watch matches, and my son Peter was quite into football, so I took him to West Ham with a friend, and also took him to Spurs when they played Middlesbrough. But I was even going to Spurs, White Hart Lane, is quite a long way.
It's also a very aggressive. Well, I've only been there once, and it was when West Ham were playing them, and I was in the middle of all the Spurs fans with a couple of Spurs supporting friends, and I found it was the most horrible experience I've had of going to football. It was so aggressive, and I thought, if they find out I'm a West Ham fan, I'm a dead man. Well,
I found actually it didn't. Perhaps just where we were sitting, didn't have that much atmosphere. Whereas we'd been to Crystal Palace, I think, again to see them play Middlesbrough, and it had a fantastic atmosphere. And South East London, quite close to Kent, so to kind of come up. So I think it's kind of part of a bribe to get him to do his homework or clean his bedroom or something.
If I'd been you, I would have taken him to Gillingham.
Yeah, I can see
that's
that.
Real football.
And I can see the attractions of that. Actually, Crystal Palace is probably easier to get to than Gillingham. It was going across country.
Anyway, back to the day when you and I went there.
Anyway, so we got season tickets, and I completely love it. And I quite like the atmosphere of the ground. So we sit in a part of the ground that is pretty rowdy.
It's where the ultras sit, Greg.
It's they're called the Fanatics in Selhurst, and very atmospheric, lots of singing, lots of chants, and I thought that given that you'd kindly take me along to London Stadium before, we'd had a very nice time, that I'd return the favour when Palace were playing West Ham, and I didn't think much of it other than that you'd enjoy the game. So we went up together, and it was pretty rowdy.
Very rowdy, particularly when West Ham went 2-0 up.
So West Ham went 2-0 up, and I was looking through my side eyes at you, and you were commendably biting your tongue and not cheering. But then I do remember, I think it was probably half-time or you went for a drink or something, someone saying, that's Iain Dale. And someone said, is it? And then someone else said, well, he's not a Palace fan, he's a Hammer. And you could sort of hear this kind of buzz going round the corner of the stadium. And actually, although it was, it's rowdy, in all my experience of being at Selhurst, which is quite a few seasons now, it is totally good-natured. I've never seen any
and I must say it was. I can remember, I think, just as we sat down, this really big skinhead guy sort of approached me, and I was thinking, oh, my God. And he said, don't worry, Ian, we'll look after you. And he sort of tapped his nose, I think, or maybe I'm inventing that, I don't know.
Well, you would have been. You'd never have had any trouble. It's totally good-natured.
But, I mean, all of these, like, really... shall we say, quite to the point chants. You were up there with Peter, your 10-year-old, chanting away yourself. And I was thinking, bloody hell, if they knew he was a cabinet minister.
Well, you can't go to that section of the crowd and sort of sit in your hands where everyone's standing up. It's a fantastic atmosphere, and I love it. And I think you got out safe and sound. And I think we ended up winning in the end, didn't we?
No, it's 2-2.
Was it 2-2? We pulled it back.
Yeah.
But
well, you are hereby invited to the London Stadium next season, so we can have a more genteel time there. We could talk for a lot longer, Greg, but we've already gone way over what I said this was going to be. So thank you very much indeed.
A pleasure. I've enjoyed it.
And join us again next week on the Iain Dale All Talk podcast. Goodbye.